I had a very strange experience 12 years ago in Starved Rock State Park, Illinois. It was so bizarre at the time that I never discussed it. I began reading the Missing 411 stories a few weeks ago and realised what I encountered fits into the Missing 411 profile. Additionally, since many of the Missing 411 stories border on the unexplainable and bizarre, I feel what I encountered was not unique, that it was a part of an actual phenomena. Here is my story. I was visiting my girlfriend in Chicago. On a sunny and calm winter day, we decided to go for a hike at Starved Rock State Park, Illinois. I am an avid hiker, and being on leave from Iraq, I wanted to take in some cool, fresh air. We hiked the park for several hours. In the late afternoon, we decided to head back to the car. About half a mile away from the parking lot, we came into an area where tree branches were broken and pulled towards or over the trail. Most of the branches were broken high up. I'd lived in Washington before going to Iraq and knew something of Sasquatch areas, so I told the girlfriend it looked like a Squatch area due to the branches broken off up high and pulled over the trail. That's about the time things started to get strange. Soon after mentioning this, I felt like someone was staring at me. It's like if you go into a room with a lot of people and someone is focused on you, you get that uneasy feeling and can tell you're being watched. It was like this, but stronger. I started to look around to see who was watching me. It was winter, and the forest was visible hundreds of feet in all directions. There was a group of walkers several hundred feet behind us, and no one in front of us, but I saw no one staring at me. As we passed through the Squatch area, I began to have the feeling someone was behind me, following us. I looked around and listened, but saw and heard nothing. There was just the people 400 or so feet back on the trail, and they were talking amongst themselves. They weren't looking our way. The sense of someone being behind me was so persistent that I kept looking behind me, I'd say at least twice a minute, but there was just the group way back. The feeling of being watched is one thing, but feeling like someone is close behind you is something else. It's more disturbing. I told the girlfriend to go further in front of me, and I let her go about 20 feet in front because I had a strong sensation of a nearby presence just behind us. So I turn around. No more than 30 seconds since the last time I looked back, and there is this woman there. She was walking, but coming up on me fast. There was something way off about her speed. She was walking when I spotted her, but her speed was much faster than her gait. It was as if she was on a people mover escalator like in an airport. She was coming up fast, and was I'd say no more than 15 or 20 feet behind me when I saw her. I was rather alarmed and glared at her. She stopped when our eyes met. I gave her a look like, what the F are you doing coming up on me like that? We stood there, staring at each other. Neither of us moved. She had her head cocked back to her left and looked at me from the corner of her eyes in a slightly alarmed, "you caught me" type of look. She was completely normal looking, like a local Chicago lady, late 50s, wearing a bright red winter coat, gloves, slacks, and etc. In hindsight, there are a few other things besides her speed which stand out. The first thing is that there was no sound, no footsteps, no rustling in the woods, nothing to tell me to turn around other than the strong sense of someone behind me which I'd had for a bit. At the speed she was moving, she would have to have been running hard, but I heard no footsteps. She was not breathing hard, and her mouth was closed. Her gait was a walking gait. She was not running. However, she was moving towards me at a running speed, I mean fast. When she stopped, I'd say she was less than 20 feet from me. At the speed she was moving in, 1 or 2 seconds and she'd have been on me. The next thing that stands out is her features. She had no distinguishing features at all, none in her hair, skin, or clothing. No shadowing or skin hues, dimples, etc. As a former Army criminal investigator, I know to look for distinctive markings on people and clothing. There were none. I'd estimate her height at 5'10". Her clothes were of uniform colouring and indistinct. It was like she had just stepped out of a department store. Her bright red coat was pristine with a uniform hue to it. There wasn't even shading, which there should have been given the clear sky and low sun. After staring at each other for I'd say around 5 to 10 seconds, I felt like I got my point across, so I turned around and continued walking. The girlfriend had not noticed anything and had continued walking. I took about 3 steps and realised that there was no way she could have come up from that group in 30 or so seconds since I'd last looked back. There was also nowhere to come from on either side. Visibility at that point was hundreds of feet all around. I said to myself, no way, and spun back around. She was gone, simply vanished. I checked the group behind us and no one had a red coat on or was looking at us. There was no one else around and there had been no sounds other than my footfalls. The woman just vanished. From that point, it took us about 10 minutes to reach the car. For the remainder of the walk, I did not feel like I was being stared at or followed. I have never been back to Starved Rock State Park and have no intention of going back. The whole thing was bizarre. How was I supposed to tell anyone about that, so I never have. My mental state was fine. I have a high IQ and a 20-year career in a STEM field following army service. At the time, I was working a DoD IT contract in Iraq. I was well rested and relaxed being on vacation with the girlfriend. There were no drugs or alcohol involved. These are strictly prohibited in my line of work and were grounds for immediate termination. I've carried this experience around for 12 plus years, being unable to talk about it because it was so exceptional and unexplainable. It's a relief to read similar stories of unusual encounters and disappearances. After reading many missing 411 accounts and the profile of disappearances, I believe I narrowly averted being snatched by whatever that thing was. I do not think it was the woman I saw. I think it was something different which I could not see. My wife and I just watched the Missing 411 documentary last week, and I've been glued to the work of David Paulides ever since. I've ordered the first book in his series yesterday, and can't wait to read it, but anyway, my wife made me stop the documentary about halfway through the film to share a story that her cousin and people from her home village experienced last year in 2017. My wife has roots in Arctic village that has a native population of about 150 residents that live a mostly subsistence lifestyle located within the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge in Alaska. This village is about as far north as one can get in North America without visiting the northern coastal villages of Alaska. The nearest hub city is Fairbanks, about a 2-hour plane ride south where we live. So obviously, this is a very rural Alaska. But the Gwich'in Athabascan people have lived in this area for thousands of years and have adapted well to the land and animals for sustenance. Arctic Village kind of sits on a plateau in a valley surrounded by vast areas of lakes, marsh, and then beautiful rolling mountains. It is a freaking beautiful region, especially in the summer, and the village has beautiful foliage, bushes, and tundra growth throughout it. But my wife's story actually came from one of her cousins that has 2 boys there. The story her cousin shared went like this. It was fall time up in Arctic Village in 2017. Her cousin's boys were playing outside around the house as they usually would be in the afternoon. I believe that she called out to the boys to head in, and her 3-year-old started up towards the house while her teenager started up shortly after. When her teen reached the home, she asked where his little brother was, and he said that he thought he had already reached the house as he just saw him walking up just a minute or so before. So they started to call out to him and looking around, retracing the path the older boy he just took. Minutes turned into 10 minutes and so on. Now, everyone has a CB radio in Arctic Village, so she got on the radio and started asking around. More and more people started getting involved. Her older boy was even driving around on a 4-wheeler by this time, frantically looking for him. After about an hour or so, my wife's cousin was scanning around the lakes and marshes with binoculars and finally saw something far off in the distance across one of the lakes. It must have been about a mile to the other side of this lake through very rough, wet, marshy terrain. She had her teen drive the 4-wheeler over to check. After about 30 minutes, her 2 boys returned on the 4-wheeler. She just received the scare of a lifetime for any parent. Now, her cousin mentioned a few things that didn't quite seem to make sense. The 3-year-old was perfectly fine and didn't have a drop of mud or debris on him, as if he had trekked his way through the marsh to get there. It was also strange that he had travelled so far in such a short amount of time and without getting at all dirty. And, for some strange reason, he was missing his shoes that for some reason couldn't be found. But what was most troubling is when she asked her boy what happened, he simply said that a big man had taken him. And this was about all she could get from him, as he wasn't a big talker at this age. Why he was taken, and why he was spared, and by what is very perplexing. But following David Paulides' work really does show similarities to my wife's cousin's story. I consider myself a fairly grounded individual. I don't have any neurological problems, nor history of mental illness or disorder. I'm getting that out of the way before I explain an incident that occurred 10 years ago. At the time, I was living in a small village not far from the coast of southeast England, UK. It was a remarkably nice day for the time of year, being mid-October, dry and sunny with a clear sky, no promise of rain or inclement weather in sight. I had decided to walk into the nearby town to get a haircut, a walk of perhaps 35 minutes, and set off to do so. I made my way in good time to my barber's and enjoyed a chat, coffee, and a trim. I bid farewell, promising to return in 3 weeks as per usual when business was concluded, and made my exit. I recall closing the door to the barber's behind me and rubbing my neckline and face with the tissue provided. It's at this point things got weird. I turned the corner of the street and found myself sat on a bench in an unfamiliar location. Shocked at this surprising locale, and not being aware of how I arrived there, I bolted upright and to my surprise found myself staring at headstones. I was in a large cemetery, one that I had never had a cause to visit but had been past as a child of 7 or 8 on days out with my grandparents. More surprising to me was the pain. My face, hands and legs hurt. On closer inspection, I was covered in deep scratches, however, none of which were bleeding anymore, but had begun to congeal and knit together as if hours had passed. In my clothes, I found snagged thorns and reasoned that I had at some point pushed through a thorny area to reach my destination. I checked my watch. It was 3 hours since I had left the barber's. To this day, I don't know how I got there, but it goes to show how these things can happen. I'm English and love the outdoors. I do loads of hiking on my own in the Lake District, had a lot of work up there around this time, and it meant being away from the family, but I loved and embraced the solitude when I got the chance. I'm actually collecting the Wainwrights, which means getting to the top of all 214 peaks in Cumbria. I'm at about 140 at the moment, so really experienced and very careful to know where I am on both GPS and paper maps. About 5 years ago, I was walking a route around some of the bigger mountains. One of the peaks on this walk is called the Great End, and the suggested route seemed too far away, so I thought I'd check for the other paths that were closer to where I was. I looked at the map, and there was a path right next to me, so I looked and saw a slightly trod path heading up, not too steep from where I was standing. There was a bit of ice and snow on the side, but nothing put me off. As I said, it wasn't steep, but after about 30 seconds on this path, I all of a sudden started panicking. Normally, I'm really level-headed. I couldn't work out what was wrong, but a nasty feeling came over me, like an impending doom. I thought that I needed to call this one off as I really didn't feel right. I turned around to head back down the path and couldn't believe it. I had somehow managed to walk up a near vertical cliff covered in snow. The only way down was to shuffle on my backside, and even then I could have slipped and killed myself with a slightly wrong move. I had been using my telescopic walking pole on the way up but could not find it anywhere. Now, this is a busy part of the world and it was a beautiful day, but there wasn't a soul to be seen. It took me about 20 minutes to shuffle down this icy slope and back onto the path. I looked back to where I'd come from and could clearly see that this was not a path but a really dangerous and craggy buttress, and could see the point where I decided to turn back. There is no way I could have got there without climbing, and absolutely no way I could have done it in 30 seconds, more like 5 to 10 minutes. I looked at the map again and the path I had spotted was a lot further around the base. I'm posting this here. It's my first post on Reddit because I've recently become properly obsessed with the missing 411 and thought this might tie in with some of the commonalities. I just saw Not a couple of hours ago, my first couple of videos by David Paulides on the strange happenings of the people that go missing in national parks in North America. The story that really got me was the one of the female bow hunter that saw some type of almost invisible creature in the tree line. This got me thinking about something strange that happened to me when I was 10 and a couple of years after it. I live in Toronto, ON. For those that don't know, it's the Great White North in one of our biggest cities. My house backed onto a quiet private section of the ravine that runs along the east side of Toronto. No one ever that I have seen, and I've lived there for 10 years, walked there because there was no path and it was all overgrown to hell. My friend and I would spend hours down there building makeshift camps and small contained fires in holes that we dug. One day, I went down alone with a backpack full of snacks and tools for digging. When I got down to the bottom, everything felt off and I instantly felt sick and paranoid. Every hair jumped up and the only feeling I had was to go back up. I shook it off as nothing and walked towards the small incline that led to the creek bed. When I got to the incline, I got the same feeling but even worse. My heart started to race. I took a second to look around to reassure myself that everything was okay. I saw nothing, so I continued on. I took one step when I heard something moving behind me. I turned around to see this 6 foot, and it could be taller because it was hunched over a bit, person-like thing in all black. Now, when I say all black, I'm talking like a black, skin-tight suit from head to toe with a hood-like thing that makes any shape of a face non-existent, as if you were staring right into a black hole. I stood there in fear as I could feel that we were looking directly at each other. It stood in a position like it was trying to run, but when I turned around, it froze in place. I can remember its chest and back moved as it breathed. I stared at it for maybe 10 seconds when the first instinct I had was to run came into my head and I booked it down the creek towards the side of the ravine with the path. When I stopped running, I looked all around me, making sure I wasn't followed by whatever that was. The months following that incident were unnerving as all hell, as whatever that thing was would show up in my backyard. The first time I saw it, I thought it was my imagination, but when I saw this thing peek its head from behind my shed to then step out and look right at me to then go back behind was when I knew that it had to be real. In total, I saw this thing maybe 10 times after that first incident. Each time though, enough time had passed that I somewhat forgot about it. I would see it in monthly or yearly intervals. I have no idea what I saw and what could have happened if I didn't turn around to come eye to eye with it. I thought that maybe if I put my crazy story here that I've only told to my best friend and my girlfriend up to this point, that maybe it might have some ties or no ties at all to something, or maybe this was just some strange stuff that happened to young me. I'd love to know what you think of the missing 411 in general. Do you think there's a simple explanation to this, or do you think there's something more to it? I'm excited to see people's opinions on this. Anyway, thank you for watching. I hope that you have a great day or evening depending on where you are, and remember to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Be safe guys, and I'll catch you soon. Peace.